All right, welcome everybody to the Wood and Risk Committee meeting on the 15th of October. For those who arrived at 9, it's we're starting off at 9:30. So, Mary Alex, would you like to kick us off with a karakia?
Sure. Morena tātou. Good morning and welcome. Karakia this morning, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina huta, kia mā taratara ki tai, hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, te hei, mauri ora.
Do we have any apologies? I think we'll, no apologies today. Thank you. Any further declarations of interest? No, much. Right, standing orders. The following standing orders are suspended for the duration of the meeting. It's a recommendation. It allows us to limit time limits on speakers. Members may speak only once and limits on the number of speakers. That option C under section 22 of general procedures for speaking and moving motions be used for the meetings. Standing orders are recommended to be suspended to enable members to engage in discussions in a free and frank manner. Seconder, thank you very much. Carried. Next item on the agenda is the confirmation of committee minutes from the meeting on the 8th of August. They're available in our pack. Anybody got any comments on those? Are we happy to adopt those and confirm those are true and fair and accurate record of the meeting on the 8th? Now, Tim, obviously you would do that. They can't do that.
I'm happy.
Alex is mover. Seconder, thank you very much. No. Resolutions and action monitoring report.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, happy to as substantially as read, just noting in terms of the resolutions, we've got some key notes there around insurance updates and noting we've got a paper on that and still a wider body of work to complete on our wider insurance strategy. We've also got, you'll note in terms of the adoption of the proposed internal audit charter, we've got some further time with ELT to work on that and present that back to you in the December meeting. So again, making good progress on that internally. And just noting as well in terms of some of the actions that you've got sitting underneath that as well, we've got updates on the risk status report that's coming through as well, and also just noting that we've got the review of the Treasury Management Policy sitting inside the work. So happy to take any other questions.
Questions for Doug? Okay. The recommendation is that we vote the report. So I have a mover. Thank you very much.
Aye.
Right, let's move through to the main and my item for today. The draft annual report for the year ended 30th June 2024. This is going to be a public excluded discussion. And start. Okay. Sorry. Right. Yep. Sure. Right. So we'll start with the open piece. So we'll hand over to Brent. Very much.
Good morning, everyone. The purpose of the report today is to bring to the table the draft annual report. Notice that this is still a draft document. The final version doesn't get adopted till the 31st of October at the next council meeting. But today we're going to have a look at the draft and hear from Stuart Mutch, who will join me shortly, and hear how the audit process itself is progressing and what there is left to do. This year's financial statements are heavily influenced by the roading recovery post Cyclone Gabrielle. You'll see a table summarising the financial statements on page 16 of your agenda pack. On the right-hand side, I have listed in a sort of hashed column the financials if you back out the cyclone recovery, just see what the underlying business as usual would be doing. And then in the column immediately to the left is the actual financial statements, which marry through to the full set of accounts that are attached to the reports. The business as usual results that you're seeing there on the right-hand side are consistent with the quarterly reports that I have presented to council throughout the year. And they show that council, like every other business in New Zealand, is influenced by the economic conditions that New Zealand's facing at the moment, particularly the downturn, the interest rates, the insurance markets, etc. And they flow through into the numbers that you see in front of you. As part of preparing the annual report this year, council has revalued a number of its asset classes, these being roads, buildings, land, and its 3 water assets. And it is also considered what roading assets have become unimpaired, i.e. repaired back to the pre-cyclone state. This has meant that council is showing a $49 million revaluation gain this year, which makes our profit and loss account look really healthy. Just bearing in mind that this revaluation gain is non-cash, it's just a book entry. But what it does reflect is that our assets are getting more expensive, and when they wear out, they will be more, it'll be more of a payment to replace them. Over the page, on page 17, is the financial position for council, which lists all its assets and liabilities. The value of the non-current assets reflects the $49 million revaluation gain, and the non-current liabilities reflect council's debt position. The debt position's grown by $2 million over the year, and the balance of this is number is made up of its forward contracts for the likes of carbon credits and its provision for aftercare for the landfill when it closes. The audit's well advanced and not far from being finished. So at this stage, I'm happy to take questions. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Stuart, who will come and give a bit of an update on where the audit's at and
Questions for Brent before we hand over to Stuart? Not, we'll join the table.
yeah.
So just probably just noting, Stuart, if there's any kind of public statements that you need to make on audit, obviously you've got some public excluded time where we'll, as officers, will leave the room for you. So if there's probably just anything publicly or any kind of public questions.
Thank you, Chair. Look, yeah, we'll talk to the detail of our report in the publicly excluded section of the meeting. From our perspective, the audit's largely complete. Really, we're just at a stage where you've got the 3 different subsections of the annual report, and then the summary document sort of coming together in terms of its final form. You know, our focus principally during the course of the audit's been on section 2 and 3, which is all the activities and the actual financial statements. That work's largely basically done and dusted. Recently sort of seen the front sections. I just want to make sure the document is a consistent flow, consistent story through the document. But essentially, happy to be here and help Brent in terms of answering any questions on the annual report that members might have.
Questions, Stuart?
Not so much for Stuart, but I have a few questions. And I don't know whether it's now the good time to talk about it, but things like bad debts, breakdown of the bad debts and how we're managing those.
Sure.
What is our policy going forward to make sure they're getting paid? Right. I see they've increased. Losses of investment. Is that internal losses or external losses, and what do you mean by that?
Okay,
There's a few other things, but
sure. Let's start with the bad debt. So I don't think that council's bad debt actual write-offs has changed significantly from one year to the next. What you're probably referring to is the provision for doubtful debts, which is disclosed on
9.5.
pages 105. So the way this is heavily influenced by the accounting standards, how we prepare these numbers. And essentially what we do is we look back at history, work out what bad debts we've had in the past, what write-offs we've had on the different debt categories, and then we apply that percentage to our current debt and create the provision. So the provision that you see there and the percentages is reflective of our historical trends. So that's how the provision's calculated. So it's not actually, we haven't gone through and actually looked line by line at the different debt types. We've just applied a percentage, which is what the accounting standard requires. Now, what was the second part of your question?
So it's more around the rates debts, and are we seeing an increase, and what are the risks involved with that as we go forth on financial issues?
Okay, so our pure rates debt, which is the top number, shows that we're putting aside a provision of $10,000 for bad debts. Rates debt is actually secured against people's properties and has a similar standing to mortgages. So in reality, it's very rare that you have write-offs in the rates. You are more likely to get them in the other categories, which are more your general debtors. Obviously, we've also applied some provisions there against water rates. Again, they theoretically have the same standing as ordinary rates and are secured against properties, but they are more problematic to collect than general rates.
Maybe just a further comment as well, Mr. Chair. So the executive leadership team as well, councillor, review that on a monthly basis as part of our FIS update to ELT, and obviously we also receive that on a basis as well. So just kind of that reassurance as well that those additional levels of assurance.
There was the second part of the question, sorry.
Just losses of investment.
Losses on investments, yes. So again, these are book losses. Council has a number of investments, what are recorded as investments. So they are things like your carbon credits, for example. And as the prices go up and down, again, we revalue those and those flow through into the investment gain or loss line.
Depreciation. We talk about depreciation a lot. We have not funding depreciation.
We partly are. So what good practice in a council sense is that we calculate depreciation, which is the wearing out of assets, and then we rate for that wearing out and put the money aside so that when we come to replace the asset at the end of its life, we have the cash sitting there. This council has typically in the past funded as we've gone and funded renewals, but not growth assets or levels of service changes. However, because of the value of the renewal program that we're doing at the moment with Three Waters in particular, we have not had the ability to fully rate fund that. So at the moment we are partly borrowing and partly rating, and we can do that in the short term, but we can't do that forever because we will start running into debt cap issues. So yes, we've got a short-term strategy that while we're upgrading and replacing reservoirs and so on, We are borrowing to do some of those renewals. At some point, we need to switch back and get back to a more stable funding renewals from rates.
I think you quite answered my question. I was asking, are we putting money aside for depreciation?
No, and we never have.
No,
This council
I'm just-
never has.
just putting that out there.
The only asset class that we're doing that for is vehicle replacements. Everything else, we're just funding renewals, and at the moment, the renewal funding exceeds our rates capacity.
That's something that's probably going to have to change in the future. I mean, the method that I'm familiar with is you have an internal loan process where interest and principal is rated for each year. So you get a sustainable sort of a process going forward. However, that's not enough because you've had inflation. It doesn't always account for that. So maybe that's something that the council should look at going forward to get things in order.
I know it's best practice to rate for depreciation, and we've been advised to rate for depreciation, but do we have any idea of what sort of rate increase we'd have to apply to cover depreciation?
Not off the top of my head, but it wouldn't be small.
But the thing is, if you're rating for loans at the moment that you're borrowing going forward, you're effectively actually are doing it. You're not actually rating for depreciation. You're indirectly doing it. So it's not like it's going to be a huge transition that all of a sudden there's a whole like 20 million you've got to raise. You're already doing it. It's making it in a more sustainable, regularized approach.
Correct. So we are rating to fund the loans that we've drawn to replace those assets. So effectively, we're paying for the assets over the life of the loan, as opposed to rating during the life of the asset that is wearing out.
So ideally, the really good way to do it is to have like you do a house mortgage, right? You pay interest and principal every year. So when you buy the asset, you say, okay, the asset's going to last for 20 years. Okay, we'll do interest and principal on this asset for 20 years. And you wait for that 20 years. So when you get to the end of 20 years and you look at the asset, you've paid it all off and you start again. You do it, keep going like that. So the whole thing becomes sustainable.
Which is essentially what our approach has been in recent years.
And that's overlaid by a capital program.
Yep.
Represented and being funded. Yeah, being what a capital project, that's really fine. That's how you got into the program. So in some ways, you sort of achieve the outcome. And we know that it's tough.
I mean, through you, Chair, I mean, the various different benchmarking information provides you guidance around what you're kind of keeping up with things. But it's also about the integrity of your asset management plans and understanding what's coming down the line in terms of renewals and whether you're going to be able to get come out within adequate capacity to be able to then rate to support those loans. I mean, what you do is pretty much consistent with the vast majority of local government. And ultimately, as long as you're staying on top of your debt levels and you're rating adequately to, and you don't get an absolute surge of renewals all at one point in time when you don't have the money in the bank and you can't actually, meet those borrowing requirements, then things do tend to sort of get through. But, the concept is right, that the depreciation is reflective of the consumption of the service potential of the asset. And so therefore, to have funds available for when those assets expire, so to speak, that's the purpose for it all.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the DIA benchmarks in this annual report gives you a bit of a rundown on that.
Yes, so bottom of page 85 is exactly the benchmark you're referring to.
Yeah.
So it's called the Essential Services Benchmark. It compares depreciation against renewals, And what that shows is the black line is what depreciation level is, 100%. And then the renewal program is the green bars, which shows that every year for the past 5 years, we've actually been spending more on renewals than depreciation. But that hasn't all been rate funded. A lot of it has been loan funded. But again, the loans are taken out to match the life of the asset, similar to what Mike was talking about.
Been there for the last 20 years. It'd be the other way around, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, if we would, again, in one of our long-term plan documents, it actually shows that same graph, but going back many years. And for a long period prior to these 5 years that you see here, we were orange below that line and showing that we weren't investing back into our assets, which is why we've got this bow wave to catch up on.
And it can also be slightly deceiving in that you could spend all your money on one sort of certain group of assets for another set. You know, the theory perfect theory would be to actually break that down by, you know, key asset type or key piece of infrastructure. But also the actual cost of renewal is not really reflective of the historical consumption of assets. You know, things cost a lot more nowadays than they used to be.
Depreciation is a proxy too.
Yeah.
So that's the other.
One of the reasons that we do revalue our assets every year is that we reset that proxy so that it is reflective of a value that's relatively up to date.
On the name of this report, you've given it to us and you've gone through it, and there's a few little mistakes, I think.
Mhm.
You want me to talk to you about that later? I mean,
How about we have a discussion offline, because I know that this is draft and there's a couple of, particularly like in that front section, there's a couple of numbers that aren't quite correct and reflective of the back.
Hard reading. There's a few spelling things.
thanks. I won't get into them now.
So how about we get together over morning tea and go through, and I'll mark those up and get those fixed.
Just there's a couple of things I was thinking about. You know, the cost of revaluing our assets. You know, we do roading and that every year. I get that. And just what is that cost to the council? Is it just a paper one? Is it? We don't have to go out there and drive every road and revalue it, because, you know, there's can be quite a substantial cost.
So we engage third-party valuers to do this valuation. So I supply them a list of all our assets. So, for example, Stantec do the valuation of roads. And of course, they're fairly familiar with our roads as our primary engineer. We also supply a list of all our water assets. So roading we do every year, water we do approximately every 3 years, slightly more frequently at the moment because of the way that inflation's been running. And again, what they do is can't inspect all our pipes underneath the ground. What they do is they use the age and condition assessment that we provide to them. They look at the material type, the length of the pipes, and use standard units to arrive at their valuation. So it's more of a desktop valuation. And again, the other category that we get valued is our buildings. Again, we only do those once every 3 years.
Which is more
The buildings actually, the valuer does come and actually have a look at the buildings. The cost this year, because we revalued lots of different things, the cost has probably been circa 60,000-70,000 to get the valuations done. In a normal year, it's probably about half that.
Yeah, the only reason I'm asking is because right now with everything, anything we can save money on is great. The other one is financial costs. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, with the financial costs in here, it talks about that's interest only, or is that interest and principal?
It's so what you're seeing in the comprehensive income statement is interest only. The principal gets applied to the balance sheet to the loan itself.
I'm just wondering, because we've had this conversation in the council where it's all very well to say our financial costs are just interest. But if we actually take a principled approach as well and say, well, okay, we're going to pay off our loans at a 20-year period, for example, that is actually a cost back to the ratepayer, as somehow you've got to pay that off. You can't just keep borrowing to pay it off.
Correct. So
So maybe I'm just thinking, is there an opportunity somewhere in there that we actually show the loans also being paid off because of, you've talked about high debt levels and what that means to our ratepayers and how much it's going to cost the ratepayers every year if you looked at it on a principal repayment of, say, a 20-year period.
yeah, so if you go to page 111, at the top of that is a list of loans by asset class, and it's broken into 5 columns. So first column is the opening balance. The next one's what we've borrowed during the year. The next one's what we paid in interest. And then fourth column is what we repaid. And then the final column is the closing balance. So if you add the third and fourth column together, you will see what council has paid on its loans, both principal and interest. So approximately $4.5 million this year.
Yeah, but and that's great, and I probably missed that particular piece, but I'm thinking when you just talk about it in the front section, whatever costs of finances, may be nice to put that in there to say that, if you're paying off both at the same time, this is actually what it is costing us to have these loans, pay them off and the interest.
Sure.
Just a thought. Okay.
I'll take that on board.
Writing it for its accounts to the accountant, so. That's a good idea. Questions for Stuart or Brent? We move into.
Stuart, I'm just, we've had a conversation about this as a committee before now, but the seeing the performance of the business outside of recovery, the external funding that's come in, and Brent has put that in his report where he split it out. Easy for you to follow within the business about how that's worked, and has there been any issues that are worth highlighting?
It's probably fair to say at the macro level, it's very much business as normal. They've basically been swamped a little bit by the recovery, and the significant focus on the streams of funding coming into the organisation to fund the recovery of the roading network in particular, and the spending on that probably does overwhelm other elements. Obviously, when it comes to service performance reporting on water compliance, or be it consenting fees and things like that, we look at all that, and that seems to be just sort of bubbling along. Obviously, as reflected in some of the document, certain volumes have dropped. In the consenting space, for example, which has caused some financial challenges. That's from a financial management side of things. We see that's ticking along and operating as we would expect. The fact that people aren't building so many properties is kind of obviously beyond council's control, but that then ends up within the financial activity level.
I mean, I think the consenting stuff is because of the proportion of user pays policy that we've run across it. It becomes a question of actually the choices we make about internally resourcing that activity and whether we can continue to repeat the costs. But thank you. It is a really big number, and I'm quite conscious that when you translate how much of that money is coming in and how it's operationalised, the other overhead and the staffing numbers and everything else that's reported in here is actually delivering twice as much work, basically, in terms of processing financial transactions to actually doing the work. It's quite a big amount on a small number of people.
Yeah, the challenge you've got is what is business as normal.
Yes.
And you won't get back there for a number of years. And so, what is an appropriate cost structure? If you didn't have all that, what would have been an appropriate cost structure for a council of this size and nature with the role that you have? But it's really hard to understand where those lines are drawn, really, because people do all sorts of different things. And in some areas, you're right. Your resources are pretty stretched because they're actually having to do a much higher level of transaction management than they might normally. In some areas, you've got people in the building, especially focused on that additional work, and that's what they do. And theoretically, once that finishes, they will leave the building. But it's not necessarily binary. It's not that clear cut in some parts.
Good observation. The other councils, Brent's done a little summary table for us about the business as usual versus the surge activity. We've talked about the extra funding. We've got other councils putting specific notes in their reports around this, and so you can actually look at the original budget and get a sense of how you perform at a business as usual level as much as practically possible.
Yeah, and some organisations are doing it kind of at the front end of the annual report. Some are actually doing it within their financial statements, because the reality that councils have, and so I work with Hastings and Gisborne as well. So sort of seeing, I get to compare and contrast three councils that are going through the same sort of situation. Because a lot of the funding that's coming in, particularly from Wakakatahi, is going into capital works, that kind of goes straight to the balance sheet and makes your P&L look fantastic. But that's not actually reality, because you're just kind of building back. And so organisations kind of want to sort of declare that they're this is what it's costing us to do. This is all the money that's coming in to focus on Cyclone Gabriel and other weather event recovery. And this is what it's spending. This is what we're spending, just so we can just make it really clear. Now, Brett's got a piece of that in the front end of the annual report. Other organisations got that more specifically in the notes and possibly in a little bit more detail. It just comes down to how you want to tell that story, how you want to make that sort of stand out. Because otherwise the risk is your readers or stakeholders will say, oh, you're making a big profit, and the reality is you're making a book profit on Cyclone, which no one is.
So you talked about a summary financial report, which isn't here. Is that a place that the readers would come to? Because look, I've prepared these annual reports, and unless you've done one of these in great detail, you don't understand it, right? There's so much stuff in here. You got to find the wood for the trees, and I totally take on Alex's comment. The basics, and that's one of the things I asked for in the report was an extra column, which you've put in there. That's gets you to more business as usual. So for me, as a reader of the financial statements, as a simple reader, I want to know what business as usual is, and I want to know what that means if we back that all out. What is actually happening at the council? And I think, being an accountant, we've really got into so much detail, and yet we've got so much in the detail. We haven't got the simple stuff at the top. How much we got this money in? What did we do? Okay, there is some statements in there that give us that. But yeah, it's being able to distill that out to a high level, so someone can just pick a financial statement up or pick up the summary up and just read it quickly and say, oh, I understand it. So I think that's what our mission is as accountants, to do that. And I don't know if we've succeeded. But I ask, what's in the summary financial statements? And maybe that's the answer to my questions.
So the summary financial statements contain the front end, so the text front end of this document, and then the financial statements themselves are consolidated down to about 5 pages. So there's a lot less pages. The whole document consolidated 20 pages in total. Yeah. But what it doesn't do is the table that I've put in the body of this report isn't repeated in there. I can repeat it in there if that's the will of the council. It's essentially what you see in the first pages of this. The left-hand columns, the unhashed one, is what will be appearing in the summary document as a standard, but I can add that extra column if you think it will help the readers.
I think one of the things that we want to do is get that annual continuous improvement story going on. So though we're affected by Gabriel and a few other weather events, there's still some very good outstanding performance in the council, and having a good solid benchmark for this year. If we don't do it now, we'll lose that data. I'll take advice or guidance from elected members about what they want to see in there. But it's really important, I think, we do strip that out so we can actually show over time continuing improving, or not the case may be, been taking the Gabriel stuff out. But even then, even the Gabriel story and the way you respond is still a story in itself. And as you say, people went to extended leads. We did a lot more financial transactions going through the book. You didn't staff, you cope with a surge of activity, and that is a story in itself. And having that set aside, I think, this helps the average reader, because IFRS accounts are a nightmare for anybody trying to hunt down that. The easier you make it at the front, the better.
I also, in addition to that, I think it's actually quite useful because it shows us how much we rely on external funding, because we needed to build back. We couldn't have done it solely as a community. We needed that external funding, and I think actually, yeah, having that right-hand column shows how much we needed that. So I think, yeah, it's important to do.
So I think we'll take that away. I think what you've done, Brent's brilliant. We think that we just need to think about how we now utilise that in a bit more detail. And I think Stuart's got an example to say about how Hastings have addressed it.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to share what Gisborne's put together and Hastings put together. And there is no one answer that's the perfect one, but we'll sort of pick around a couple of options to sort of see whether there's a good one pager that can go in the sort of front end of the summary.
Comments around the summary as well.
Yeah, no, why it's fresh in our mind. So, okay, is there any other questions before we move through?
I just agree that tightening up of we need a really strong, tight and clear narrative of those parts to explain at the beginning. There's lots and lots of words in here, and we need to strip words tell a part of the story, but we need to strip that down to that real core component of recovery, business as usual, and the activity challenges that we've got.
Yeah. Okay, are we then happy to move? Just want to notify the public, we're going to now move into public excluded time. The items we'll be discussing there is the Ernst & Young management report and the audit findings, and we'll talk about the emerging risks later. Okay. So we're just going to do the audit, Ernst & Young management report. The reasons for this, so we can have a free and frank discussion and chat about things amongst the employees, members and officers, and the other reasons is holding of information is necessary to maintain the effective conduct of public through the protection of the council. Members, officers. I'd like to thank those watching for the moment, and we'll return soon. Can I have
You'll just send you the
we need to know what Welcome back, everybody. We've concluded the public excluded part where we've had the annual report from Ernst & Young, and we'd like to go back to the agenda for the public meeting, and Brent would like to just conclude your conversations and your recommendations. Welcome back, everybody. We've concluded the
So you want to conclude the annual report?
yes.
Right, so the recommendation. The recommendation is that the committee receives the draft annual report, and that upon hearing assurances from Ernst & Young, that they endorse it so that it can be recommended to council for audit. For adoption, sorry, once the audit is completed and the final adjustments that we have discussed today get made.
Probably noting, Mr. Chair, there's been some just notes of amendments as we've gone through, so we'll get clarification, so we'll just make sure that we get those voted as we go through.
Much. Any other questions before we move to? One mover and seconder. You're all happy? Married?
Aye.
Aye. I can carry it. Thank you very much, Brent, for your hard work, and please thank your team for the efforts they put on as well. It's been, you know, as you say, a challenging time with work, and then NZTA turning up the next week. Well, so yeah, pass on our regards to your team, and I'm sure you will have a celebration with the auditors at some point in the process.
We're all having a deserved break.
Yes, indeed.
We'll give Mr. Chamberlain a week off before he starts in your thing.
Righty-ho. Now moving through to the Treasury Management Report, Monitoring Report.
So this is just a standard report that gets brought to this committee to show how council's managing its cash positions and its liabilities. Just the highlights from the report. I'll take the report largely as read. So at the end of September, council had 13.5 million in the bank. Since year end, so since the end of June, council has drawn a further 4 million in debt. Bringing total council debt to 48 million. The details of the loans are shown there on page 127. Council has also taken in additional 20 million of forward starting interest rate swaps, which are also shown on page 127. These bring the council's average swap portfolio to be an interest rate of 3.76%. Just noting though that all these swaps that we have in place to convert our floating to fixed have forward starting dates, so none of them are currently active. I think the first lot go active in December. The graph at the bottom of page 130 shows what these fixed interest rate loans and fixed interest rate swaps do to our cover in terms of fixed versus floating, based on our assumed capital program and our assumed debt forecast. Obviously, this is showing a forecast figure and is reliant on us being able to deliver that program, and also assumes that Three Waters debt remains with council. So those are the assumptions it's based on. Bottom of page, on page 131, council also reports on its compliance on the other various ratios that council reports against for Treasury, and I can say that we're compliant with all those. And then the report concludes with a bit of an update about the economy, which is a little bit outdated now because we've had another OCR announcement since then. So I'll take the report as read, but happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Just a question on the 30 million we've got on deposit. Is that part of pre-funding, or how's that come about? Just a timing issue? Is it all sitting there all the time, or?
We don't have 30 million.
13, sorry.
We've got 13 million, which is just our normal cash in, cash out bank account. So again, the date that this was done was at the end of September, which is not long after we'd had our quarterly rates come in. So yeah, it ebbs and flows. So it is higher than usual, but we do typically hold anywhere between sort of 5 and 7 million on a typical month.
So it's sort of like your working capital, really. That's what.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So do you,
Subsequently, some of that has actually been put on a term deposit. So we're not holding quite that much in a call account. We obviously got a slightly enhanced interest rate by putting it onto a 90-day term deposit.
so do we do any pre-funding? For example, we might borrow 6 months in 6 months' time, we know we're going to borrow some money. So we go out now and borrow it now, stick it on deposit for, I don't know, 5 months until we need it, 6 months till we need it. Do we do that?
We have in the past. So again, it depends on what the interest rate markets are doing. So during the COVID years, where you were paying very, very little to borrow money, and we were actually able to put it on term deposit and actually make a margin in the middle. We certainly were doing that. That's not the case at the moment. So we're tending to borrow as is needed and not hold the money longer than we need. But that might change again depending on what happens with interest rates in the markets.
The reason why I ask is I know Standard & Poor's are pretty keen on that, but we haven't got a rating at the moment, so not necessary. However, there is an arbitrage opportunity which you pointed out, which can be can be quite useful in terms of generating some funds. The question I had was in relation to this report was at the end there we've got a next steps, and what I'm looking for is something forward looking. So in the report we talk about a little bit about going forward possibly, but I think it would be really useful to have in here just to get a bit of insight as to what council's thinking about going forward. Like we've got a maturity coming up, what are we thinking about? How long are we going to borrow the money for? Are we going to borrow it fixed or floating? What is our strategy around hedging? What hedging are we looking at? I think that's alluded to a little bit in the report, but some sort of forward-looking suggestion in there, like what's coming up. I think that would be really good. Which sort of takes me to my next question. Do we have a treasury strategy, like something that you might document that you might do every year and say, okay, our strategy for the coming year is these are our debt maturities, this is our capital expenditure. We're probably going to be borrowing X amount of money. We're looking at our maturity profile of our debt, and we're going to probably borrow 3 years, 4 years and 6 years, and we want to fill up all those buckets and so we can be in compliance with our treasury policy. Also, we've got our long-term plan. We've put an interest rate assumption in there of 4%. How are we going to match that assumption in the plan vis-a-vis our hedges, and how are we going to do all that stuff to make it work? Because I'm hearing at the moment, it's all good stuff because interest rates are all coming down, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that should be okay. But if we had hedged previously when interest rates were low, we might not be having that conversation. So I'm just thinking, a strategy document might be quite useful. And I know we've got a bit of a wild card in there with the three waters because we never quite know when that's going to come at us and how it's going to muck up all our treasury. But so just comment on treasury strategy.
Yeah, so a good suggestion. So currently at the moment, while we're doing all those things, it's not documented as you are talking about. And that piece of work would also dovetail quite nicely with the piece of work that Jim Palmer has recommended, where we look at our insurance and what headroom from our debt we actually need to hold aside for touch wood that we don't have another Gabriel, but whatever comes down the line. So that would all form part of the strategy. There is a financial strategy that was put together as part of our long-term plan, but not specifically a treasury strategy. So
For you, Mr. Chair, I just wondered, Brent, if it's worth speaking about the role of Bancorp as well. So I think we haven't had a presentation from Bancorp. Probably it might have been, I think it's the last one. So maybe just explaining.
So Bancorp are obviously our treasury advisors. They're available to me anytime on the phone. So before we do any borrowing, we always have a chat around what the market's doing and where the best opportunities are in terms of the length of the loan, whether to go floating or fixed. We also have quarterly meetings with them, so they come down to Hawke's Bay regularly because they have other clients down here. And then, yeah, probably annually we get them along to this forum and this committee. But if you would like us to arrange a meeting for the December meeting, we can get them here and you can question them about some of the strategies and things that council should be considering going forward.
Maggie, maybe just through you, Mr. Chair, I think probably a good opportunity for us as well. We'll have that conversation with Bancorp as well, and just may well be that there's some provision in the advice that they give that we can bring back. But yeah, it's part of the offering they already provide us to some extent. So
Yeah, well, there's a bit of work in all of that, and that's probably something that they can do. And it's also a useful document to hold them to account too, because they're giving advice, and it's always good to look backwards and see, well, is their advice been good or not? So yeah, gives us a clear roadmap going forward as to what we're intending to do as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Some good. Any more questions for Brent? Okay, Brent. So the recommendation there is to note the Treasury Management Report. Okay. Through to the Health and Safety Report for July and September. Sure.
Adrian.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, committee and chair. Before you have the regular health and safety report, which is a standing item on your agenda. The purpose of this report is to give the committee visibility, assurance in relation to the health and safety information, insights, initiatives, and the operational work undertaken by the business. Acknowledging that Ms. Anand is on leave at the moment, I will do my very best to answer any questions, but I may need to come back to you after the meeting on any specific matters. I'll take the report as read, but we'll also talk through our key points to highlight from this quarter. Largely, this is a work program update with no major changes. There are 3 key points from this quarter report to note. For displaying the progress of the development of the critical risk standards has been updated to show project phase of each standard. This was in response to feedback from the RASC committee from the chair. Note that we have also added a comment on not started category. Although this phase of the development of the standard reads not started, there are a number of controls that are already practiced and in place, but are yet to be captured, formalised in the development of the critical risk standards. Update on the wellbeing. The Wellbeing Subcommittee has initiated a health safety, a wellbeing subcommittee has been initiated and has been led by the Health and Safety Committee with a focus on wellbeing throughout the business. And we plan initiatives to support staff wellbeing in the future. Re-incident reporting. There was one contractor incident that was reported to WorkSafe due to fire being approached by a wellbeing. These details for which are in the report. In the main contractor lag indicators, you'll see we've now included the contractor's incident frequency rate by man-hours graph to give the committee visibility to the frequency rate across contractors. We've also included this in the health and safety report that goes to the executive leadership team. From that discussion with the executive team, we plan to discuss options to improve contractor reporting at the next Service Delivery Excellence meeting, which is scheduled for December. Are there any questions?
I was the one that asked for the contracting hours. And it actually is an interesting just looking at and seeing the difference when if you look at the graphs that you've got. Well, it looks quite great. And then you see one of them that's bouncing up with obviously incidents for less hours. What are we doing about that? You know, now we're seeing these new positions. I'm just quickly looking at it, so I don't have all the figures in behind, but it's quite a almost concern of one of the contractors that in the first graph it was very flat, and then suddenly they're going up and down. What are we talking to them and how are we approaching this?
I'll hand over to.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have 100% confidence yet in those numbers. If you look at the Higgins example, there are zero events, and there's one blip in one of those months. We're not confident that all the events are getting reported. So we're going to bring this up with our suppliers in December and just have a conversation really around health and safety culture and reporting. The contractor, I think it's Veolia, who have the highest number of events. They actually may be the highest performing supplier in one respect, because they're actually being honest about what's actually happening. So we just need to get to the bottom of that. I've got concerns that we might have a culture of not reporting, and that may not mean management not reporting to us. It may mean things are happening on the ground, and that is not getting from grassroots up to supplier management.
Because if you take smart environment, the near misses in May is the one. But then if you take per hours, contract per hours, it's in April, 5.
We've also had a discussion. Through you, Mr. Chair, again, part of that confidence is also recognising the difference in the nature of work. And one of the key conversations we'll be having with, so the majority of Higgins's work hours are primarily based on their landfill contract, which is the same methodical work, same 2 or 3 staff that are involved. So that's certainly being part of at a ELT level. What again, as we try and unpick the data a bit more to understand the trends as well, what some of the other underlying causes of that might be. So,
because one of mine here, you're talking about the trailer fire. Is that a health and safety or is that a mechanical? There's a balancing act in some of these things.
Through the chair, that's coming under one of our critical risks, so that is something that we would look at, and it would come under fire, obviously, and it was notified.
So just with that, when will we expect to see just a full incident report come through with recommendations?
Sorry, so WorkSafe have not decided to progress, so they're happy that we've reported it through and we've done a full investigation, so we can provide that information to you.
The key thing with this contract is obviously we'll do our own due diligence on their systems, but this is what they're reporting to their people is what they need to report to us. It's one and the same, right? So there shouldn't be any further obligations or costs because they have to do it anyway. And if they've got the right culture, they'll share what they're doing internally. So we're on the same pinball. Yes. Got that culture of standard that we've.
Mr. Chair, what I'm looking for in the December meeting is a leadership conversation, really, and just to be curious around some of these figures don't quite right. How about you go back into your own organisation, some leadership conversation with your people who kind of work out there on the network, and make sure we got this right.
Say, frustrating. It's just repetitive ongoing work. It's different if somebody's doing one-off tasks, and
it is kind of, again, it's some of the regular conversations we have about apples with.
And just it's a critical risk that's not currently in progress, so maybe I'm not asking the right person, but unauthorised access to a site containing a man-made body of water. For it to be a critical risk, if we had near misses or incidents that have been reported, and yeah, I mean, what has made it a critical risk? Why is it there? Is it, and when we talk about man-made water, we're talking about the oxidation ponds, or are we talking about the pools? Yeah, stormwater drain. Yeah, what is making it a critical risk to us? Has there been incidents that we are possibly not aware of that we need to be?
Through the chair, there have not been any incidences. This was a recommendation from our external party impact that this becomes a critical risk, as it does affect some of our workings.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you'll also recall there's been some coroner findings. There was the Gore incident in particular where somebody passed away in one of their oxidation ponds. So there's been some precedent and some case law as well that kind of just recognises the proximity of our ponds to some of our residential areas.
But it's nothing actually.
No, through the chair, that it's probably twofold, considering what Mr. Tate's just said, what's happened in a national context, and then the work that we did through impact. It was identifying what at a Central Hawke's Bay context posed the greatest risk either to staff or to the community. So there was a really thorough process that happened, and lots of workshops that were involved to identify what the critical risks were for Central Hawke's Bay, while considering a national context for other councils as well. So quite a lot of work went into identifying them right at the beginning.
I don't necessarily need anyone to respond to this, but just something that I'd like to raise to be considered in your people one, about the impact of vulnerable children and vulnerable young adults and the interactions with our council staff as well. Just thinking about the amount of community interaction that we have. We don't see directly any compliance reporting around vulnerable children's legislation directly to here, but just a topic that I think would be helpful to explore when we think about the employment work we do, the library work we do, the pools contracting work we do, all sorts of things where there's that interaction with young people, and would be keen to make sure that we've sort of had another conversation about that and what it looks like. Thanks. You won't be able to respond.
No, well, through the chair, what I can say is that through our recruitment and onboarding process, we go through I call it vetting process, because the word has escaped me right now. So we're required to, under the vulnerable children's at work. Sorry, I'm going to not remember the name of the legislation, but we do have to, as part of the pre-employment check, ascertain whether there's any Ministry of Justice checks, anything to do with that, and that's role specific, and that's specifically set out in a policy as well with what employment roles in our business might interact or be around vulnerable children.
I think so. That's helpful. Thank you. But I'm thinking more along the lines of the exposure that our staff have got, not just so the critical risk of interaction with the public is coming from this narrative of confrontational, angry, cool. But actually the societal impacts of our staff who are interacting with people who might be exposed to domestic violence, who are young people that something's going on for them. Have we got a process involved where those staff members actually know how to report that through and get support? Or are those staff members taking on that responsibility themselves and not knowing how to escalate it? We actually have some responsibilities to look after them in that context as well. So it's not just about whether we meet the employer obligations in the Act. It's actually about how we are enabling good process for our staff to be safe in those interactions with members of our community who are really challenged. So it's just a slightly different lens to that one about dealing with angry. It's about dealing with hurt. And really, some pretty heavy stuff. So, yeah, happy to talk about it again in a different environment, but that's just part of what I was looking at.
I can do a short response if you want. Thank you through you, the chair. Thank you, Alex, for your suggestion and question. So what we currently do, particularly in the library space, is that we do, if that fronts to our staff, that we wrap support around them to ensure that they're okay. We are working through what the process is in terms of when do we notify to police. So we're working on that at the moment.
Had a question about, and it's just for me really, not understanding the business as well as I probably should, is the gap analysis report. Can you just explain to me what that is? Was this a consultant we came in and that's a whole lot of examples of what we had to do? Okay, that's the nods, yes, that's good. But then the question is from that as well, we've got a list of a whole lot of things we need to do. And then we've gone through and ticked them all off. My question now is, where are we at with the gap analysis report? It's 50 items, say we at number 40 now, and we've got 10 more to go. What's the status, please?
Through your chair, I'll need to come back to you with that and can provide that information to you.
Because it's important to me that we've got someone that's come in, that made some recommendations that, and it was done in 2021. One would have thought that we would be pretty close now to it having achieved all those, given we're 4 years or 3 years down the track.
Through the chair, there is on page 137, it doesn't have the exact numbers, but it has the pie graph which Ms. Annan has put in, where it shows actions complete, on track, or whether we're in continuous monitoring. And maybe we could organise some time offline to take you through what the actions were that recommended, because some of them are not just do and you're done. It's more a continuous improvement process, similar to how Ms. Annan is undertaking the critical risk standards, where it goes into a monitoring phase. So essentially what I'm trying to indicate is that we're never really done, and we're in a continuous improvement cycle with health and safety, looking to take on board best practice. So there are some key recommendations which we'd be happy to take you through and give you a bit of insight into how far we've come, which is similar to the conversation we had through the induction process as well, just to give you a bit more visibility on.
It's more about refreshing my mind on it. That's also,
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Probably just through Mr. Chair, just probably on that page on 137 as well. Some bring back 7 as well. Some of just of those that might be bringing up fresh, just be some of those highlights about kind of what's in progress and what's a bit of a rank status or something.
Yeah, I think just an observation for me on the table of the critical risks you've got there, with that you're tracking that progress as we go back and review practices against a new standard that you want to implement. It's somewhere in that process, and let's just take the example of, say, somebody who is leading our library operations and gets confronted by an individual, ensuring that they understand how they would respond to that incident in terms of protecting themselves, because that's the immediate issue. So the training, identifying where these training needs to take place. And let's take driving as a simple example, and in the farming context, training people to drive four-wheel drives properly is a critical part of that step. So all drivers have been trained to a standard, and that we've then gone back and checked that they've actually learned from the training, and they are executing the procedures, as we say, in terms of speed, wearing the helmets, the way they manage animals, etc. And an example is ensuring that we have the ability to say, look, all our librarians have been trained in the process by which we want them to manage a confrontation, and we've gone back and checked that they understand that process and are confident that they can safely source out of that. And so as part of that, your table, you will identify training needs, and I think one of the things that comes through from health and safety people is getting evidence that you've actually done the training but equally monitored the outcome of that training. So capturing that data as you go through is going to be really important as well. So when something does happen, we can actually say, look, they were trained in that environment, they safely got out of it. So, award, congratulations on all this hard work you're doing, but I know it's a journey, and yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Recommendations to note the health and safety report. Move in a second. All carried.
Aye.
Nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian.
Insurance and strategy placement update, Brent. 149.
And so the purpose of this report is to give you a little bit of an update. So you'll recall that Jim Palmer came and gave a presentation at the last risk and assurance meeting on the draft insurance strategy that we had and made some recommendations. One of those recommendations was to look at updating our loss modelling so that we can work out what our maximal loss would be in the event of another natural disaster. That will then determine how much financial headroom we need to be setting aside to be able to respond to those types of events. Interestingly, not too many days after that last meeting, Aon contacted me as part of the annual insurance placement and had a discussion with me about our caps on our insurance policy. So that our caps are basically the maximum claim that we can make and would only ever be triggered in a large event. They weren't triggered in the cyclone, thankfully. So Aon's comment was that these caps were last reviewed by the Hawke's Bay councils in 2018, and it was time that we should look at these caps again, particularly in light of inflation, and look to bring these caps up now that the market has softened somewhat and that the insurers are willing to take more of the risk back. Obviously, in a perfect world, you would do loss modelling to determine what your cap needs to be. Given that we don't have time to do that before the next insurance placement, we have used a proxy of the construction inflation over the last couple of years and suggested that our caps need to be lifted by about 50%. And I have asked Aon to come back to me with some quotes on what it would be with the caps as they are now and what it would be with the caps at this new level. The next step would be to undertake further loss modelling and do that before the renewal in 2025. And I conveyed Jim's concern that the previous loss modelling that we had didn't fully take into account the latest science with the Hikanui Trench, and they agreed, and that's going to be incorporated into the loss modelling. So once we have that loss modelling and once we know a little bit more about what's happening with the local water done well, we'll be able to complete that piece of work that Jim's proposed, which is that financial component to the insurance strategy. The second part of the update that I've got is obviously we're getting very close to the 1st of November when our insurances all roll over. And we are anxiously awaiting on confirmed premiums for next year. You'll see that I've given you some updates. So while we don't have the premiums, Aon has been to the London markets on behalf of the 5 Hawke's Bay councils and the other councils that they deal with, and have been seeking terms with the underwriters. For those that don't know, because of the size of our portfolio, no single underwriter will take on the entire risk themselves. The London market itself wears the majority of that, and then we have a number of smaller New Zealand-based underwriters that pick up the balance. So they're just working through with each of those for their placements. What they are seeing, because they now have rates substantially from the London market, and they're just trying to do the rats and mice with the New Zealand market, that they are expecting for material damage and business insurance that the prices will be relatively flat compared to last year. So that's the premium, the amount of premium per dollar of cover. Remembering that our cover requirement has actually increased because we've built new assets and we've also had inflation. So while the premium might be flat, the actual dollar value of the invoice will still go up. For infrastructure, which is our below ground assets. So this is mainly our water assets. They're expecting to see a small decrease of somewhere in the magnitude of 5 to 7%. And for our motor insurance, which is a fairly small policy, they're seeing a small decrease in terms of the premium on that. So that's the updates that I've had from Aon and where the insurance strategy is at. So as these loss modelling and things happen next year, I'll bring them back to this table for you to have a look at.
Nice, logical. I think it's good to see the progress on the thinking. It's the thinking's evolving and we're getting a bit smarter. I think it's good. And nice to hear that flat word on premiums.
Yeah. It's a word we haven't heard recently, so it's very good.
With the caveat, I understood the whole bill might still go up.
Yeah, so yeah, the dollar value of what we're insuring has definitely gone up, so that will drive a small increase. But thankfully, we're not getting a per dollar increase and a replacement value increase on top of each other.
And so probably just noting that obviously we'll have to confirm kind of end of this month once we've actually got quotes in. Once we've landed where we think we've landed, we'll provide an update by email as well. So much more awareness. So probably that one up. Right.
Thank you all. Okay. So we've asked to note this report. So we're going to move on. Thank you very much. And carried. Doug, our main work program. Page 51.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, happy to take the report substantially as read. This is the one committee where it feels like we've actually got a pretty rigid and structured work program. It's a lot of kind of repetition that goes through it, but probably noting as well that this is just an update, Chair, so we're not asking you to necessarily adopt the program. Our hope is to continue to have the interface between this and the other activities as well for risk considered as we would with committees, because there may well be new risks that also get escalated back up to this committee. So other than that, look, you've seen this before in public workshop. Yeah, if you take any feedback again, we'll continue to update it as we really a big milestone for balance of this 1 year being the 4th December meeting. We get what is the schedule of 5 meetings for each. So, yeah, if you take any kind of feedback on that, again, we'll look to report them.
How we catch up on the things that we've missed for October already? And there's quite a bit in the December one. So there was sensitive expenditure and gift was listed for this month. BMO at risk projects. And then obviously we've got some big stuff that's coming into the 4th of December meeting, including beginning pieces of work on carbon credits and treasury management. There's just quite a bit there. So we're going to juggle the bits we've missed and the bits that we've got there. These are all important.
So substantially the big ones primarily, BMO is probably the most notable one. That's not saying that there's not a level of sensitivity around gifts. But that's really where the majority of the PMOs is where our work needs to go, and that's part of a maturity shift that we're having. So I'm comfortable with December. We're going to get the structure, we're going to get the format of it right.
Yeah, I just think we just need to keep an eye on it. It's
Yeah,
it's
right.
easy to have a spreadsheet, but can we actually follow through on what's on the spreadsheet? You know, like it's yeah, I just because otherwise we miss some of those things. Start as we mean to carry on. That's all I was trying to get across.
Just a question on legal compliance. I see on here legal risk update. I'm not sure if there's anywhere in here that we check the legal compliance within the organisation. And I guess question is that in our terms of reference? And I believe it is, but I don't see it on here.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for, we put those comments up in the workshop last time. We're just working through an appropriate process to try and right size that for us. So there's some packages that basically almost off the shelf packages that you do as like a compliance checklist. So, again, we're just working through that. Yeah,
Okay. Sorry, you
On how-
did
on how-
mention that a while back. Sorry,
That's right. No, just closing that one out and just it's
Yeah.
more about how best to
do it. Yeah.
how best to provide it back to the committee. It's in a right sized way for us as well. So, yeah, but noted, we'll add it to the list, and it may well be it just stays a white box until we confirm our best project. So,
Yeah, interestingly, I pick up that it's a bit of a challenge across all parts of local government on this one. And ironically, we just did a bit of training on civil defence emergency management as elected members the other day, and it was brought up by the trainer at the time about compliance of councils to the Act, to the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Act, and the comment made about it's not something historically in the sector done really well. Is actually as council following through on there. What's required of them in those spaces.
But there's a huge amount of acts that we have to
Exactly.
to comply with, and you know, the chances of running you know, not complying are pretty high, given and people just don't know that they don't know, right? So it's a question of, well, how do you do that? And everybody should have, I would expect, in their own area, have responsibility for certain acts, and then know what they have to do under those acts. So there's a process. They have a process that they check, you know, have we done this, have we done that, have we done that, and just tick it off, you know. And there's councils that do, they've got software and they've got processes that we can borrow if we don't already do it, or I'm not sure where our status is, but you know, it's just something that we should do, is just in case we run foul of the law.
Just one other thing to add to that conversation. Interestingly, we had a conversation as councillors at the time of setting the 3-year plan about resourcing into compliance.
Yeah.
At a practical, like proper inspector kind of level, and also about risk. And there was additional bit of resource put in there, but it was not a substantial amount, and that's probably the question we're going to have to grapple with. It's going to be resourcing. This is where the question comes back to.
One question, the internal audit program, it's only as have we done specific internal audit? Is it something that or is it largely just on a case by case basis?
Alex answering the right. I'm happy to. So there's been historically
Probably 2022.
it was the last kind of 2021 actually was the kind of full internal audit. We paused, you'll recall, we paused in 23 to do the risk status update and reallocated some of that funding, and like now it's kind of going back to square one to get a sort of getting good process set up with the aim to bring something back to December. So that's the aim. So we just need to get that grey box lifted as well. And if it's helpful, again, if it's helpful, we can probably work out with the chair what the appropriate kind of timeframe is to keep bringing things back. We need to move parts of the program around, or
There's it's like all those sort of one-off exercises. You've got to see that out of them, you know, what the problem trying to solve. So I know people do have all the programs back. And you're asking yourself, you know, do we have that resource in house? Do we have that externally done? And if so, you know, what is the value you're actually said? You things like the PMO and other areas we're investing in now are probably priorities at the moment. And they do tie up management as well. So the key, I think that the key thing for me is as you say, is this solves up to best practice, and by case basis, we believe there's areas that we need further investigation. Then propose a process of just seeing all what's been used, it's the bad, you know,
Yeah, and I think probably just to get through like testing some of these, so yeah, this was kind of a list of all that I found across kind of the 18 months ago now, in terms of both OAG recommendations, some of the best practice risk and assurance committees. Doesn't just because others are doing it doesn't mean that it's necessarily right sized for us or appropriate for us to that end. So again, I think as we work through, it's actually understanding where the benefit and like say what are the things you're looking for assurance on. So
Yeah, I'd be more interested in just to go back to Michael's comments around legal compliance. You know, there's a little size getting that up and going and running. And then once you've done it and we know whose allocation's responsibility, what parts of the act they own, get that organised up and running would be something that would be beneficial, I think, at this stage.
yeah.
Okay, any other questions? If not, we are asked to see the update of this work program, and yes, we're going to go to the second one. Thank you much, all carried. Thank you. Nicholas, status report 154.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to the committee. So before you is the one of the regular reporting items that we have on the agenda, the risk status report. The update in this report being the continuation from the work that we did in the workshop at the last Risk and Assurance Committee, where the exec team had at that point in time done a draft and a review of the revised top risks to the business. We had the workshop with the committee in the last meeting, and since that time we've gone away and further developed those risks, and also taking on board feedback from the committee in terms of how we set them out on the table. In particular, you'll see from how we've reported this that we've changed them to risk statements, and we've also inputted the controls into the public facing report, which is the discussion that we would have normally had in the workshop item that follows this report. Really keen today to take any feedback from the committee. You'll note that it's in draft because we're expecting A, some feedback from you, and B, there's a few assumptions that we've made in terms of the risk appetite settings for council, which needs to be back and socialised with them. And also noting that we have the workshop that follows this. So if they require a bit more discussion, happy to have that conversation then as well. So for the purpose of the report, what I will do is go through what we would normally do in a risk status report, and I'll speak to each of those risks where it's sitting outside of the current risk appetite settings, or where we have made an assumption of where the appetite setting should be for council, but again, saying we haven't had that conversation. And then we've got some of our risk owners in the room. So if there's any specific questions on these, I'll get them to jump up and join the conversation. So on the first page, what's page 156, just noting I've seen an area there, sorry, the second one in prosperous districts, where the title should be what's in the event. So just acknowledging that. The comment there being the officers, we're obviously right in the midst of heading into the annual plan process, where we are reviewing the rates increases for year 2 of the 3-year plan, and trying to see what we can do to bring them down from the forecasted level. And the risk being that the level of rate pay arrears and non-payment dramatically increases, and it's around the affordability of rates to the Central Hawke's Bay district community. On the next page under strong communities, the last one I'll talk to, and that it sits outside of the appetite, the CHB communities inadequate response to a natural disaster or civil defence. So this one's about the community's response. This is where we have tentatively updated a risk appetite, which needs to be confirmed by council, but acknowledging here the comments that a lot of work has been taken to improve community resilience and been previously reported across a number of different areas of council, but not specifically to the Risk and Assurance Committee. And the reason that it's amber is that the work is ongoing and there are actions yet to be implemented at the community level. The next one over the page, connected citizens, so different to the community's response. This is talking about our council's response, and the risk being that it's inadequate in response to a natural disaster or civil defence emergency. In this one, we have updated the residual risk to amber. And the kind of the headline to that being that we know we're well placed at a local level to respond to events, but there are a number of things that are underway at both a regional and a national level, which impact us and are about the civil defence system itself. And the action being that we will continue to engage in those national reviews and recommendations and implement them as they come out. Next one down in connected citizens, it's the risk being IT business operating systems stop working. So this is the cybersecurity risk to the business. We have changed this residual risk to amber. We did that through the review process with ELT, and the reason that we've done that similar to the above, the logic being that although we have a robust work program ahead of us, we're partway through the work program. Not everything has been implemented yet, but also acknowledging that in that area, there's always going to be a risk to the business and that the cybersecurity risk to us, the hackers will move quicker than we're ever able to keep up with. So just being clear on, as though we're doing as much as we can, there'll always be some risk remaining to the business. Where are we? Right, so through to the environmentally responsible. The one on there being the risk that the council fails to meet legal, regulatory and moral obligations. There's just a note here saying that we've updated the risk appetite and there's some notes there for that. And on the last page, I have Mr. Swinburne available as well. Sorry, I should have mentioned on Zoom because some of these infrastructure ones have been updated. So under the critical asset risks, in a CHB context, we'd heard specifically as well to keep these risks local for us and what it means for our community and council. So specifically in the critical asset failure risks, we've identified the risks being the reservoirs and the rising and falling mains. So these both affect Waipokoro and Waipawa. There are updates in terms of when the work is scheduled for each of those pieces of infrastructure and any mitigations or controls that the risk owners have in place to monitor the condition of those assets until the time in which they are replaced, or if they're not being replaced, the reasons why. And also a notable mention from Mr. Swinburne's area is that he's underway with developing the asset criticality framework ahead of the capital program delivery to help him better identify which assets are most critical and when they should fall in terms of replacement and upgrades. So there's a lot of new information in there. So yeah, any questions, we're happy to have a discussion with the committee.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the report. It's good to see the column on the right-hand side where you're actually, what you're actually doing with the risks and those ones that are outside appetite. I really like that. I normally focus on, when I look at these things, process, are you doing it in a way that makes sense and is a best practice? But today I had a couple of questions regarding some of the controls and getting into the detail of it. The very first risk there, council doesn't deliver on the 3-year plan and on expectations. With the controls, and I think you sort of covered it off, but I would have thought your project management office might be in there as a control. And then the next one I had a question about was the one, the third risk down, council is unable to fund its activities. Listening to you, this is more about, I think it's affordability, isn't it? Because I was sort of thinking this morning, going back to Tim's comment, what are our bad debts and stuff? And I sort of got the level of ratepayer arrears, and I don't think that's, well, it's not a problem at the moment, and I'm not sure if it's going to be a huge problem unless we have our rates increase at such a level that we choke everybody. So I'm not sure if bad debts is part of it. So anyway, that's just a general comment. Apart from that, I think that's good now. I like to see the controls now. I think that's excellent. So there's a lot of comments and anything else to say.
I similarly really like this. This is really helpful. And my question probably is in the one that we're just looking at the appetite around regulatory compliance and wastewater. I've got a theme today. And actually one of the things in there is the fact that Taumata Arawai has been tasked with standardising the frameworks, which is actually quite an important controlling factor that probably helps us with. I just wonder whether that's worth mentioning in there too. So the regulatory environment is changing, hopefully simplifying. So that's actually part in there as well.
So through you, Chair, I'm assuming it's just Swinburne's online, but that's something we could do. A lot of feeding and yeah.
Just through the civil defence training that this is governors, and we talked about a business continuity plan. I'm just wondering whether A, we have one, and B, should that be in controls if we do.
So through you, Chair, I can answer this because your question sparked this conversation with the exec team. So formally, no, we don't have one overall plan. We did talk about it a number of years ago, and that there's obviously a number of different events in which you could have a BCP for. However, we've been through a number of civil defence emergencies over the last few years where we have the bones of what a BCP would be like for that particular event. And there are a couple of events which we haven't had to respond to, for example, an earthquake, where we know that there is work to do around what our BCP and response would look like for that type of event. A BCP in itself is quite difficult to do at a generic level because it's very event dependent and the scale of the event. But we have got those, if I go a layer down, event specific. We do have the framework in place for some of those events, just not all of them. And that's the work that we are continuing to progress.
I just thinking, I was reading the other day about the likelihood of a solar storm coming potentially next year, and I just thought, goodness, we just need that added to our list of events we need to plan for. But yeah, I guess, yeah, like you say, it's hard to have a generic plan, but
it is. Sorry, through the chair, however, but we do have, I can see Ms. Blair sitting here, for example, we're planning a scenario for it. We've been through 2 cyber events this year. We know that it'll happen again. We're going through another practice event to make sure essentially when it is a BCP, but what is our response plan when that event does happen? So for areas of the business, it is moving along. It just needs to look holistically with what ones are missing.
Probably through you, Mr. speaks to that. Growing maturity we need around, another word for BCP is kind of that contingency planning based on risk as well. So being even more, so we've got some base plans in place for that. Speaks to where our level of resourcing still needs to go to address those underlying risks as well.
Anyway, so you just raised an interesting issue about solar flares and stuff, and this makes me think, we work with emerging risks. Do we have a emerging risk register, like things like that, things that are on the horizon, so another pandemic, those types of things? Do we have a register with those in and monitor that?
So not a full not a full register as such. So that's part of the kind of the operationalizing of the risk process that we do as ELT. So but prior to this meeting, there's some dedicated time that we set aside to talk about what are the emerging risks for the organisation, whether that's appropriately very good or not. I think that's probably part of our growing maturity. That's actually you've had the conversation where you write that down. I make some notes that formulate what will be our PE item in terms of the PE emerging risks and issues, but actually quite important for us to probably note up in here how we document it. So
Yeah, because these things come and bite you, and if you've been thinking of, but we've been thinking about it ahead of time, we've got a little bit of a plan in our mind how we might cope with it when it actually occurs. We're sort of ahead of it.
I've got a suggestion. If you've got things like that that are burning on your table, we've got a little whiteboard here that's got a curious box at the bottom, which is quite helpful for noting things, and it's got things like artificial intelligence, risk management, facilities, and risk-based insurance. We've made progress on the risk-based insurance. In the curious box, it's helpful for us as governors to pop that on the wall.
Oh, okay,
People know that it's there.
okay, cool. Well, I'll get you send you something on email about it.
Cool.
How's that? Make a note to do that. Just can't think of them all.
No,
And actually, some of it is not even just about emerging, but if I think about the natural hazard risk register for the region that comes out of civil defence, ashfall from a volcanic eruption is one that actually 20 years ago happened here well, 30 years ago, 1994, I think it was. From the ashfall and Western Cape providing drinking water, that's all of a sudden creates a really interesting BCP scenario. So if we go back to what we know, the risks are there outlined on the civil in the Hawke's Bay emergency pages. So
and then goes back to BCP and saying, well, it was curious then how we would water out the that. That's the so. And once again, I applaud you in terms of work we've done on this in terms of the controls and stuff. And if you go through all the controls, there's a long list of them. And for another day, it's just actually ensuring, you know, in terms of confidence around those controls that you have, the level of confidence, and therefore then the mitigations that are coming out of that. So it's just constantly asking ourselves, you know, is that control real and it actually operating? And therefore my mitigation is actually on by assessment of those controls. And you eventually have both the owners of those processes actually allocated. And so it's chatting to them and saying, oh, do you have confidence in the controls you've got in place here? And therefore you can review on how we're approaching the mitigations. And unfortunately, the big chunky stuff is actually in your capital program. Ultimately, you know, and we know that it's scheduled. So we've got mitigations in the interim, manage those until such time as those capital works programs take place. So very good.
Just one little question you raised it about ownership and stuff. With these risks here, everyone's got somebody owns each of those risks, right?
So
Just
through
to
the
ask the obvious question, sorry.
yes, so through the chair, so yes, risk owners are probably the only one that doesn't have a single owner would be the first one, which is a joint leadership team risk. And just to Mr. Gibbs' point previously in terms of the controls, that's the conversation that we have started, which is why some of this work is in draft. So part of this process with the exec team is that we went through and we rated how mature we assessed each of those controls to be with some of the risks, how well we thought they were actually being done in the business, and that work needs to continue because some of them are things we should be doing versus things we already are doing, and that's probably a really important distinction.
And that'll help inform here as well, though, that deep dive workshop session where we can go through some of the controls and the maturity and be part of the prioritisation in terms of resourcing and focus as well.
So just in colour coding, so you'll get the council to go through their appetite again.
31st break.
Okay, good. And just to confirm that a green appetite is the low tolerance, isn't it?
Correct, yes.
So the only high tolerance one we've got in the from the section from the council at the moment is the council's infrastructure is unable to service development. And one around legal advice. It was interesting given the council opposed to make legal high tolerance.
Yes, and through the chair, I think Mayor Walker's comments from the last workshop was to a suggestion to move that wastewater compliance fund in particular to red. I wasn't so bold as to assume that and put it in this report, but I think that will definitely come out in the conversation with the council table.
We're noting that the appetite column is still working.
Yes.
So
it's actually a really challenging exercise to do with a bunch of governors. They don't necessarily understand how the risk framework comes together. It's a difficult conversation to facilitate.
And the risk title makes it sound like you just want to break the law willfully, but it's actually only relating to Waste.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Look, I don't think it's bad to have have the appetite low and have the what actually is a lot higher, and council can accept it, like we can't always be in with risk appetite, we can throw money at things, but there's a certain amount of time or certain point at which we can't throw any more because it's uneconomic for us to do it. And we have to accept the fact that we're outside the risk appetite, and that's it, and the council needs to make that decision.
I 100% agree. In fact, there's probably more of that come through because if you look at the program of works, the reality is your appetite probably isn't reflected. You won't be able to go through it in presents.
I actually think when we last updated the appetite statements, it was at quite an interesting time, just post cyclone. No,
Late last year, I think.
it was a weird time that we did it when
Yeah.
people's emotions were a bit wound up.
Yes, and also acknowledging that I think the council's appetite probably changes quicker than, and we have talked about that previously, that it's penciled in for annual review, but in all reality, like the executive team's review of this, it was scheduled for a year. We brought it forward because similar to feedback from the committee, things changed, it didn't feel right. So I think we just need to continue to be agile when we see something is off. What is the process in which we socialise that again at the council table without running the risk of needing to come every meeting because something's changed as well. So just trying to balance what's
The
right.
appetite will settle. Actually, if we review it enough times, I actually think it will settle. I don't think it's completely illogical. It's just the practice of doing it and how difficult it is to have the right conversation. And what it practically means. But I think actually once we've done it another 1 or 2 times, actually, I think it will settle to be fairly consistent.
The other thing that comes through is just the natural constraints you've got. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's still, these.
And through the chair, we've also at a point where we're now implemented the 3-year plan as well. So the landscape's changed, whereas there's more certainty versus last time we were planning and moving into the next 3-year plan. And the funding was unclear for some of these solutions.
The most important thing is people actually utilise these as a tool for day-to-day work, and people are continuing looking at it, whether it's orange or red, probably the day is not really the detail, is actually thinking through the consequences if this thing did occur. How would we respond? How would we have the controls in place to protect it? And now we're prepared for it. And that's the key thing. And we know that, there's events where it's coming out okay. Right. Any other observations or questions? So thank you, Nicola, for the work on this. I know it's in process, but it's I think largely you're breaking the back of it, which is great. And now we're getting into real job of working on it. So we've been asked to know the status report. So Michael, thank you very much. Harry. Right. Next agenda item is the next meeting, which we've till the 4th of December. Is that I might unfortunately, I'm up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I'm trying to get myself sorted out, and I've got the long standing thing that I'm being a far north, can't get back in time.
Well, let's just leave that for now. Leave the resolution there.
Leave it for the 4th of December, and then I'll come back to you.
Yes, you don't even need the resolution. That's where I was going. You don't need the resolution. So let's just move on, and we'll confirm.
Right.
I'll confirm that by email.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all good.
Okay. Time now to move back into public excluded time. And thank you very much for the public for listening in. And we're about to move into public excluded time to chat through the emerging risks and issues for discussion with management and staff. The reasons for this, once again, is that we just want to have a free and frank expression of opinion between ourselves and members and officers and employees. And secondly, that some of the information we're going to be discussing is going to be sensitive. and we think it's best to protect the council. I'd like to thank those who have been watching and have a seconder and I'm sorry, I have a mover and seconder. Yes. Thank you very much. All in favour of moving? Aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Robert.